eliminating several parking exceptions that are currently found within the code that have been there for decades, that they're consider eliminating them. A few well-known ones, TDRs, a minor parking exception. That staff report is online, and I could answer more questions related to that. We're also sending out an RFP. Right now we have parking assets downtown, parking garages. We want to see, for the most popular ones, does it pencil and does it make sense to use attendant parking in those to increase capacity without having to build additional structures? City Hall, we just sent a letter of intent in to take part in the Caltrain Go Pass program, which means that all City Hall employees will have a free Caltrain pass in exchange for giving up their parking permit. We're expecting somewhere between 50 and 100 spaces within City Hall to be free for additional permit sales based on staff giving up their permits. We're also looking into a car share program, Zipcar, something along those lines to be utilized downtown. What we've heard from a lot of employers downtown as well as property owners is they do have employees that want to take the train to work, want to take the bus to work, but they're worried that a car won't be there if they do have to take an emergency trip home. So we're trying to get that critical mass of pool cars in the downtown area so that if someone does need a trip home, they will have confidence that a car will be there. And then of course tonight we are finalizing our initial proposal for the framework for an RPP program. And then the Council recently had a colleagues memo, which will be finalized hopefully over the next couple weeks, directing staff to really look at a comprehensive transportation demand management program for the downtown and other commercial areas. All right, so for this one, everyone knows there was a resident-led process for the downtown area. We've been doing every 6 months, we've been validating what the parking capacity issues are within the downtown residential areas. We've had community meetings for feedback, and the next step after this will be Planning Commission as well as City Council consideration. I'll also be working closely with Jaime and I will be working closely with the Planning Commission subcommittee related to parking, and of course with all the neighbors, which I've gotten to know well over the last few months. So that's where we're at there. So going into the initial proposal, I know this is really hard to see, and we have the maps up there. We also have the PDFs online that will allow you to see these up close if you want to zoom in. I will just go quickly over what our initial thoughts are. We have two concept maps up tonight. They're very similar. What they do is basically take different sections of the downtown north and downtown south areas. The size of the sections are different. The perimeters are Alma to the west, to the north, the creek or Palo Alto. To the south is Embarcadero. Initially, we were going to go to Middlefield for the eastern border. We decided to put it to Gwenda. That's going to consider, we're going to have additional outreach to Crescent Park, but just looking at the trend data, we wanted to go a little bit past Middlefield. As I'll also touch here, staff is also going to be coming forward for a recommendation for a residential permit parking opt-in ordinance for other neighborhoods. So if there is residents' interest in adopting an RPP program within those neighborhoods, they will have the opportunity to do so. So let me just go over some of the key details. But you could go ahead and take a look at these. Like I said, we'll post. These are already posted. It's a small map you're looking at tonight, but please do take a look at it over the next week or two. Give us your feedback. You could email me personally or email Jaime or give us a call and give us feedback. Those are the two maps. So here are some of the key details. I just try to put what questions people have asked me. Here are some of them. So a majority of the permits that would be issued to residents. And when we say residents, that's both renters and property owners who show us proof that they're living at the address. Usually that's in the form of your driver's license or your utility statement or something along those lines. Up to 2 per residence. We're considering that if it's a smaller, 1-bedroom apartment or a studio apartment that you would only be issued one permit. A smaller portion of permits would be sold to commuters and employees for the overall area. Right now we're saying up to 40% of the capacity. We would probably start out with a lot less and monitor, and then if there is additional capacity, be able to sell some of those permits to help subsidize the overall program. One good thing that's both a win for the business owners as well as the residents is it would eliminate the Caltrain all-day free parking problem that we've heard from a lot of you about. That once again, a pricing option. Do you want to pay $5 in the Caltrain parking lot, or do you want to park in the residential neighborhoods for free? So it will eliminate that because they wouldn't be able to get a permit. In most zones, 2-hour parking would also be allowed, so that if you have service workers or someone a guest that's coming over for a short amount of time, they would be able to still use the street parking. We put 4-hour there, but it's probably be somewhere. We might recommend 3 hours for some of the block. And one of the concepts, we have up to 3 to 4 hour parking in one of the zones in downtown North, closest to the downtown area. We don't have an exact permit cost for you tonight because we still need to price out the overall program, but the end goal would be that the residence permits would be less than the commuter permits. Initially, we're thinking of tying the commuter permit costs at least at the cost of what currently you have to pay for the parking garages downtown. That way you wouldn't create an incentive to use the neighborhood parking and not use the downtown parking structures. One good thing I think also for both the residents and the business owners is that it wouldn't be a permit that you stick on your car. It would be a hanger permit that you put in your rear view mirror. That gives you greater flexibility, that if you have your son or daughter visiting for Thanksgiving weekend and they need to use the parking space, you could give them the hanger permit. Also for businesses, one of the big complaints right now is because of the bonding requirements that created the garages, it is a permit that's issued to the employee and not the business. So what you end up having is if that employee only works 2-3 shifts a week, they only get to use that permit for 2 or 3. That business only has an employee using the downtown parking assessment parking space for 2 or 3 days a week. So this would allow both the residents and the business owners to give the hanger permit to whoever needs to use it at the time. And we would also allow additional guest daily permits to be sold to residents at a nominal cost. So that basically covers the key points of the staff recommended parking RPP program for the downtown area. We will also most likely be bringing forward a proposal, staff-initiated proposal for the Cal Ave area as well as other commercial adjacent areas. We will also be drafting an opt-in ordinance for other residential areas for neighborhoods that want to have a resident-driven process. What we've used actually worked pretty well, and many of you probably heard in Crescent Park there's been an overnight parking ban that's in effect now. It actually worked well. We had a resident-driven petition process that then we followed up with a mail card survey to make sure that that people actually did feel that way and weren't forced to voting a certain way. So the program's expanded, and we actually ended up issuing 2 permits per household as part of that pilot program as well. One thing I did not put there, and I should have put there, but left out the slide, is in terms of timeline. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're really looking for feedback over this of our key points, which are in the PowerPoint, as well as which zones do you like more, which ones make more sense from a resident perspective. And I'll take questions from everyone after this. Okay, one second, let me finish it up. We will, after we get that preliminary feedback, in the late October timeframe, we'll be sending out a resident survey. We will work with the residents, some of the key residents. If you have some comments or concerns about how the survey is drafted, we're happy to sit down with you and talk to you about that. We want to make sure ultimately it is fair and objective and not a push-pull, but at the same time we do want to work with everyone to make sure that it's fair and objective. We'll be looking for, we've gone back and forth, what percentage of people. I think since this is a staff recommended proposal, we'll be just looking for the greater than 50% mark for each section. If there becomes a situation, let's say that one section of the downtown area votes no, we don't want to have it, and we get the results, it's a leapfrog scenario where there's one section that does it, a block or two that's missed, and then it goes further in a section that does it, we would probably resend out that survey to those affected residents with the results so that they know they'll be put in a position that would be tricky from a parking standpoint. And overall, this is something that we want to get in front of the council before the end of the year, get in front of the commission obviously before it gets in front of the council. And this would be, like all programs, at least in my opinion, is something that we need to monitor, we need to adjust, and it's a pilot program at first because we want to make sure it's working well and working effectively. And then after that, it would go into more permanent. But overall, I think any type of program that you have like this, that's this comprehensive in nature, you need to make sure that you do monitor and you do tweak it when necessary. So that's it. Jaime, did you have anything to add?
No.
So we will take questions and comments at this time. Oh, and actually, one thing I forgot to say is we actually did get they are taping this tonight. So we will be able to, I know that was a big request, and fortunately a person came in and was able to tape this, so we will also have that on our website.
Okay, the question that's on my mind very much is, I'm a resident. I live on Bryant Street between Lytton and Everett. I get a parking permit. What is not said is what I would like is, as a resident, I would like an 8-hour ability to park in front of my house. I don't want it timed for a resident in front of my house. I live there. We have 2 cars. One's in the driveway, one's in front. I'm not always going away. I frequently work at the downtown library.
So if I could just stop you real quick. If you have a permit, there's no time restrictions.
That's what was not clear from what you'd said.
Okay, then I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. If you have a permit, you're not subject to the time restrictions. That's the idea of the permit.
I was wondering, but it doesn't say as much, right?
Yeah, in addition to that, there's also 2-hour parking there. If you have a visitor or someone coming to your home to be able to use it.
Fine. That relieves me.
Yeah, yeah, that wouldn't be much of a permit program.
I just want to add, though, even though you get a permit to let you park beyond the 2 hours, the standard 72-hour restriction by the California vehicle still applies. So we don't want people to store their vehicles on the street either just because they have a permit.
Thank you. I don't know much about, I live right downtown on Everett Court. So all my driving is done through busy areas. The thing that concerns me most is the 2-way stops, because the cars are parked too close to the intersections. And I can't see, I have to crawl out into the intersection before I can see if anybody's coming. So if you would only paint red lines so that there's a 2-car length before the corner, so that somebody driving there can see what's coming, either that or make them all 4-way stops.
Hi. Because you haven't described what all these colors are on the maps, and because it's too small to read, maybe that might help some. A, it would be nice if you would just go over that. Sure. And B, what about all of my neighbors? I mean, I have 2 cars, but I have many neighbors who have 4 cars and more cars. It's not legal to define a family as a mother and father and children. So there are houses on my corner, for example, where there are maybe 10 adults who live there and there are 10 cars. So I just want to bring that up as an issue also.
Yeah, I want to explain the colors quickly. So both of them are very similar. You would be issued a permit that would be good for your color zone. So if you lived on a certain block, whatever color zone you are, you would be, or numbered block, or however we define it, you would be issued a permit for that area, and you would be able to park anywhere within that area. Same goes for the commuter permit. If there is a commuter permit issued for a certain area, you're only allowed to park in that area and not in other areas. And why that's important is, A, it allows you to have some confidence that you're going to be able to park near your home, and B, it's also easier to track and monitor from a capacity standpoint, so that when we could see where certain people are going, and we could issue more or less permits based on capacity within that individual district. The key difference between the two: Concept B essentially has more zones than Concept A has. So there's more defined zones within Concept B than there is within Concept A. One thing, in the primarily commercial neighborhoods, not in the downtown core, so the SOFA, part of the SOFA area, as well as that smaller commercial area in downtown north adjacent to Alma, those would be primarily 4-hour parking. Since there isn't many residents there, we would issue the permits to, if there are a couple residents in there, we'd obviously issue permits to them, and then also work with the businesses around there to define what capacity issues they have, divvying it up between 4-hour parking and commuter parking for their employees.
Sure, I'll just add a couple more comments to help you define the zone. So in the map 1, in this particular concept, this is predominantly just the existing downtown core. So that's the existing downtown color zone system. In this concept, there is no change to that existing structure, with the exception that along Forest today is half color zone along the north side, and then the south side of the street is just like a 2-hour parking restriction, but no color zone. This would put the color zone on both sides of Forest in this specific concept, but preserve the downtown grid basically from Forest, to Lytton up to Middlefield. And then, as Aaron mentioned, in this, what I call the downtown north commercial zone, this is predominantly a 4-hour parking restriction without a permit. That was something that we heard from the businesses in the previous meetings that they wanted. It was more of a 4-hour structure. Again, all still subject to change, but that's just trying to respond to those concerns. We also heard from some of the business owners and property owners in the SOFA district, the business district of SOFA. They like their 2-hour structure. But again, there's definitely still some resident areas like Aaron mentioned, so there'll be limited resident permits distributed here as well as in the downtown north. And the first block north of Lytton to Everett is a 3-hour parking zone without a permit, and then 2-hour, 3-hour south of Forest to Channing without a permit, and then 2-hour, 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 and then 2 hours up to Gwenda. And basically now on the other side, this again is the 2000 RPP concept, and we try to keep that. That actually had a smaller footprint of the downtown core. There's a little bit of difference in that there's RPP distribution between the blocks of Webster to Middlefield, unlike the first zone, which takes the color zone all the way to Middlefield, and then also preserves that half color zone on Forest, half just 2-hour parking. But no 3-hour or 4 hours. This is predominantly all just 2-hour parking by block zone. Without a permit. Without a permit, I can park there, but it's just like a color zone in terms of the length of time I can only park in that area. That's right. That's right.
So,
So it's very much like the color zone in implementation.
So let me head over there just because I was kind of heavy on this area, and then I'll just kind of keep coming around again. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? No, I had this guy up here, and I left him hanging over here.
So first of all, I think all these different zones seems a little hard to deal with, but how do you, when you have in your area a high density apartment complex like 101 Alma, let's say, and they provide parking, how do you handle that? Because there's maybe 400 people living there in an area that's 1 block in the color zone. So how would you deal? How do you see dealing with something like that, where a lot of people like to park not in their parking, and that's one of the problems I think in downtown Palo Alto.
yeah, I mean, I think part of that we'll have to work with the property managers there to see what their actual parking capacity is versus parking usage is. And I think part of this is both for I think for commercial property owners, it's to really start to think about how you get to work. For residential property owners, it's also, in some circumstances, forcing people to use the supply that they actually have. Yeah.
Here you go.
Along the same lines, the question, you said up to 2 permits per residence. How is that residence defined? And also, if you could say a little bit how the guest permit program would work.
So residence is defined by a street address, so a housing unit. Whether you're renting that housing unit or you own that housing unit and you're living in it. Let me give, as we take a look at supply, we'll take a look at, if there is the ability, if you do have more licensed drivers in your home and you don't have on-site parking supply, to be able to increase that. So, we'll be flexible, and that's part of this process that we're going through to, hear concerns about that might be out there and adjust as necessary.
My name is Lane Mason. I live on Hawthorne in a 2-bedroom. I arguably have off-street parking, which I use when I go out of town for a long time because of the street sweeping. I always park on the street because it's in and out easy, and therefore I'm taking up a space that could be used for a downtown worker. How many permits will you give me, and can I sell my permit to a Caltrain person? Is it transferable? Is the permit transferable? Is it only to me, and how are you going to enforce that?
It's transferable to someone within your household. So that's the idea. But we can't have a situation where there's a black market for hanger permits. And I think what we would do is tie the you would give us a list of the license plates that would be using a certain permit, and we would tie that to the actual permit. So when the police are going around. And some of this is going to have to be enforced by the neighborhood themselves too. If you notice that this situation, what your neighbor's doing, and it's abusing the program, we would need to hear about it.
I just want to add, but Aaron mentioned it though. So our police department does have a brand new license plate recognition system. That process hasn't been deployed yet, but as part of this, it would hopefully be utilized. And like Aaron mentioned, the license plate would be tied to the permit, and there would be likely frequent checking. Every once in a while they check a permit. If something new pops up that hadn't been there before, that likely be one that they could check. And so that would be another way for us to help police that practice.
Would you give a permit to someone even though they have off-street parking available?
Yes. But
So,
probably not beyond that too. I think there may be some other vehicle code violations related to parking a boat on the street.
so I guess this falls slightly under guests, slightly under employees, but this is Palo Alto, so contractors. You have 3 trucks show up, for a month or 2 or 3. How do you plan on handling that for residents?
So my initial take is that there is some flexibility allowed when you have the hanger permits. So if you're at work that day, you could give the hanger permits to the contractors. We'll also sell guest permits, but let me think about that some more, and we could.
Can you buy permits for just a month?
No, we were at this point. They would be the year and daily permits. So you could buy a stack of daily. They're called scratcher permits, where you scratch them off. But let me give that some more thought to see how we could handle that.
Yeah, before I forget, I also did want to mention that because we had talked about the distribution of commuter permits, within the resident neighborhoods. Those permits would only be sold to people that could prove they are employees within the downtown area. So if someone that just wants to park in Palo Alto but then hop on Caltrain to go work up in the city, we would not sell permits to those people. So even though a commuter would want to buy a resident permit that allows them to park within the neighborhood and in one of the districts, they would still need to prove that they are employees working within the city of Palo Alto.
Okay, well, I live at 101 Alma, which has come up a bit in that north corner, and I don't believe the building has a lot of parking, and it seems that if you're going to have guests, you're somewhat required to have a permit. Someone shows up, well, what if someone shows up like a stepson and gets sick? It's, plus, I must say, having moved to the city, and this may have been discussed at another time, I tried to get parking in the downtown garages, but was informed that everything was provided for businesses, and we had been living in Palo Alto for some time and paying taxes here, so that was rather a slap in the face. So I don't know.
Unfortunately, the way that it works with the parking garages is that the parking garages were actually created by assessments on the commercial property owners. So the commercial property owners, not the city of Palo Alto, actually paid for those, and there's restrictions associated with the bonds that used to create those. So that's why that situation. I know it's unfortunate. Yeah. So and the other thing is, yeah, we'll take a look at 101 and 101 and see how that would ultimately work.
One quick question about the commercial distribution. Is that going to be, so can a person who works downtown ask for a specific zone, or will you be distributing the commercial permits by zone based on where they work?
I think we would do our best attempt to distribute them to where they, near where they work. I mean, if capacity fills up within one area, I mean, they may have to end up walking further.
You mentioned that the maximum number of employees or commuters would be 40%. What is your target or standard for total percentage of filling in the block? 80%, 100%? I mean, is there some concept of what's the ideal or acceptable density in a particular block?
The standard that all cities use is 85%. I think for the most part that will be our standard. If we have a situation to where there's a block right now that has a lot less capacity, we may not have it go up to that. So I think what you're going to see is our ultimate goal is to free up a lot of the areas that are closest to the downtown area, distribute some of that parking impact, but at the same time not create a situation that wouldn't be there eventually anyway.
I just want to provide some answer to that question as well. I think what we'd likely do is try and have a goal of not wanting streets to be parked more than 50%. I think 85 is the threshold that we use to say that it's probably overparked or it's like at capacity. So as part of this system, what we proposed was to allow up to 40% of commuter permits to be available per zone. But that would mean that we'd probably start out with maybe 10 or 15% initially and then kind of monitor it over like a 6-month period, figure out what's the right balance. So we try and achieve a 50% occupancy on those different street blocks. Let me come back around here, just have their hands up.
One of the issues that's not addressed so far is that frequently the residents raise the issue of the quality of life issue of having cars literally bumper to bumper from one end of the block to the other. So part of that is how much open space are you going to leave? You've addressed that initially. The other is, are you going to stripe the streets to prevent that kind of parking?
So regarding the striping, we've heard, like most issues, we've heard both opinions from residents. I mean, we've heard a lot of residents and business owners saying, can you stripe the streets because it makes it a more efficient parking area. We've heard from other residents that say, don't stripe the streets because it makes it look like a commuter parking lot. So I think that's another thing we're going to have to work with the neighborhood and gain some consensus. I mean, from a technical standpoint, I mean, yeah, it makes sense to stripe it. You're going to have more efficient use of it, but that plays into the quality of life issue. So, I mean, that's something we'll work with everyone on. No, we haven't. I think it's going to depend on a block by block. I mean, our goal is to the areas that are red now to reduce them significantly, and the areas that are green now not to increase it significantly. So it's finding the right balance. But like Jaime said, at 85% is when we say we've gone over the line. So we'll have less than that, and we'll work through the commission as well as the council and the neighborhood on doing that. But yeah, I mean, our quality of life is going to be the bottom line. I mean, that's hard to define, and because it's a subjective term, but I think freeing up some space and not having to be a commuter parking lot. I mean, I think, just talking to some of the Crescent Park folks, immediately after we put in those A-frame signs that restricted overnight parking, their quality of life improved. So right when the program goes into effect, I think you're going to see some pretty significant changes in terms of saturation.
If I can stop you, I want to pass the mic around so people have an opportunity to talk. Plus, because we're recording, if you don't have the mic, I got to ask you to please hold your comments. We'll come back to if you have additional feedback.
So I have a question on some of the districts and the zoning that you're doing. So, for example, the people that are living on these borders of the zones, as far as convenience goes, for example, if they have a yellow, red parking permit, but they're going to be restricted to that area. For example, if one of those districts or zones is filled to capacity, even with permits, are they going to have to drive 6 blocks rather than, for example, just cross over into one of the yellow zones for one of their permits?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is there's going to be some situations where it's not the most convenient situation for residents. I mean, there's not a perfect program. So, I mean, we'll work for you, but our goal is to make it easier to park than it is now. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So there are going to be, anytime you create any RPP district, there's always, no matter if it's one giant one or one to smaller segments, you're always going to have people who are on the border of some type of thing. So, I mean, we'll work with everyone on that, and, like I said, it's going to be a pilot program where we could tweak it along the way. But our goal is to not issue the maximum amount of permits we think we're going to issue, so we could gauge it so that there will be ample parking in the area.
Okay, and then the other ultimate question is enforcement. You mentioned about police officers and they're scanning their license plate. Is this primarily going to be a burden on the parking enforcement when, for example, you do get fined? Is this going to be done through the counter on the city of Palo Alto, or is this going to be done through the police department?
You could typically pay citations online, so that would be the goal. The goal would also be to eventually distribute permits online as well.
I think we have 3 audiences that we're trying to appease here. We have the residents, we have the businesses, and there's one audience that has been neglected in this conversation, and that is the customer that visits downtown. And have you thought about the unintended consequences of having, let's say, for example, lower paid employees who like that free parking in the residential district, they don't want to pay for a permit. They then start parking in the 2-hour zones that are meant for customers. Have you given that some thought, and can you put that into context somehow?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is going to force employers in some circumstances to make a decision, or commercial property owners, whether or not they want to pay for some of the parking, for their employees, so that they could park within the commuter parking zones. We did purposely keep, I mean, you talked about customers. We did purposely keep some of the 2 and 3 and 4 hour parking potentially within that area to give some flexibility for customers or people who are making a short trip downtown. But, I mean, there's going to be some inconveniences for residents in terms of not being able to, at nighttime park as many cars as they potentially parked on the street. And it's also something that we're going to have to work with commercial property owners and business owners on to make sure that the permits are allocated correctly to the businesses that need them.
Back to the topic of the boundaries of different zones. One idea would be to make the residential permits be universal throughout, say, downtown north, and just have the sold permits be by the region. Because, again, if you come home at mid-afternoon and your little segment is fully parked in, you're going to park somewhere else for a 2-hour thing and then move your car and so on. It would make more sense just to go and park somewhere in the neighborhood where there's space, and so you could control how much parking you get by selling the commuter permits.
That's something to consider.
I'm always compelled to ask this or bring this issue up every time we have these meetings, but that there are a lot of very low-income part-time employees who work in the downtown area and who work in SOFA, for example, or they don't have the kind of money to buy permits at the rate that you sell the permits in the downtown garages, and their employees' whole business model is predicated on low-income employees. And I can't believe you've sat down with those employers and had them be really pleased about this situation. And these are people who, they make our coffee, they sell us groceries, they paint our nails. I mean, we all who live in the downtown area, one of the reasons we live here is because of the services. It's one of the things that makes downtown special, and I would be concerned that we're going to drive that sort of service business out of the downtown area by doing this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is a concern, and I think one of the reasons that an RPP program hasn't been adopted to this date is the impact that it could have on businesses. I mean, if you break it down on a day-by-day basis, though, let's say they pay $50 a month. I mean, that's like $1.50 a day. So it's not a huge cost on a business. And secondly, from a flexibility standpoint, if you have a part-time employee having that hangar permit, you're not having to buy a separate permit for each employee. You could distribute those, so it takes an edge off of some of the costs at least. But yeah, I mean, that's a staff concern. I think that's a community concern overall, but it's a balancing act in the end.
I have a question about in terms of the voting. Is when you talked about some block or some section may vote. Is it by block? Is it by section? First of all, let me ask that.
That's something that we're going to have to think about. Our initial take is that it would be by section, ultimately.
Okay.
I mean, that would be our initial take. I mean, if people have strong feelings in another way, but since we are proposing sections, it would make sense to have sections.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. For example, next door to me is a large house, in which I think maybe 6 or 7 Stanford students live in. Now, who gets to vote in terms of that house?
It's one vote per household.
So does the questionnaire or the ballot or whatever you call it, does it go to the owner of that house?
How do we do to occupant? Jaime?
We typically send, I'm trying to answer your question, I'm sorry. We typically will send it to resident, and we wouldn't put a name on the actual ballot. So in a lot of ways, and I always joke around, we've caused divorces in our lifetimes on these kinds of issues. But in a lot of ways, it will be the resident that opens the mail first. They'll have to have the discussion internally. We'll do our best to outreach and let people know that those ballots are being sent out. We'll probably run some ads in the paper, as well as send multiple flyers letting know that the survey will be coming, so people will be looking for it. That's typically how we've handled it. And I think whether we track them by block or by zone, we'll definitely track them by block so we know, because we would want to know which blocks within the zone are not supportive, and then share that information. But I think Aaron's right. By district is how we would do it.
And for the Stanford situation, they would, they just have to have a democratic process themselves within their household to decide.
Okay, so it sort of would be like one vote per address is kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just have a concern about the voting, because there's a lot of occupancy by people who are somewhat transient and who may not give serious consideration or see it the same way as someone who has been a resident there for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, in general, my philosophy, and I think most cities' philosophy, is that a renter has just as much, rights as a property owner. It's hard to go that other way, even though I hear what you're saying. It's hard to make that other decision.
Yeah, I was involved with the planning of this back about a decade or so with the police department. One of the bigger issues was the distribution of the residential permits and I guess the black marketing of them. And the police were saying that one of the ideas that they were pushing on was to say that every car should be registered for residential permits, should be registered to the address in order to receive a permit, so they're not being sold off, which I think maybe want to consider that now. And then I also agree with the gentleman who brought up the idea that if you have a resident hangar or permit and your particular color zone is filled up, it would be a good idea if you let them be able to park in another color zone. So.
Yeah, we'll check with our police department. We've been working with them, but we'll check with them on that specific concern.
Could you please just clarify with regard to overnight parking? I heard you mention so that the hourly restrictions would even apply overnight in the resident zones, but would they not apply during the night in the downtown zone as currently?
No, I understood, Jaime, correct me if I'm wrong. Why don't you go over the hours?
So the proposed operations of the RPP program would be for this downtown core area, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And when we were making reference to the overnight parking, Aaron was talking about the Crescent Park neighborhood that just implemented it near the 101 corridor.
And we're open to feedback too, and that's probably something we're designed within the survey about the overall hours of enforcement. Typically, those are the hours of enforcement, sometimes 8 to 6, but typically just the daytime hours. Just from a enforcement standpoint, it reduces the costs of police enforcement.
As I understand it, College Terrace has an RPP program that works pretty well. And there's a College Terrace resident here. Maybe she could tell us, if she wants to, a little bit about how they've dealt with all of these same problems. Okay?
I will, but I'll just add a little bit. Every RPP program is different. I mean, there's different influences to what's impacting. So, I do want to hear exactly what she's saying, but at the same time, there's different influences that go into parking.
I don't want to take up too much time because I don't live in downtown North, but what just strikes me off the top of my head is it's extremely complicated. I cannot even imagine how it can be enforced. And the cost of enforcement of something this detailed and nuanced would take so much more time. And the main cost of an RPPP is enforcement. So just off the top of my head, I would urge you to look at the College Terrace program more. It's really simple. It works really well. We've been told by various traffic officials that 90% of the of it comes from just people being willing to comply with signage. And I would be curious if I lived here, if what other cities allow residential parking permit programs to have up to 40% commuter parking and then 2 to 4 hour free parking for everyone. It seems to me like people might come home with this program, and I could be wrong, I'm not an expert, and not find a place to park anywhere close to their house, which puts a great burden on disabled people and mothers and people that have been shopping, and you get where I'm going.
No, those are all good points, and that's why we said up to 40%. We would start with a much lower, we'd start with a lower percentage.
Aaron, I am concerned about one thing you said, which was that the goal of the program is not necessarily cost recovery. And so if that isn't the goal and you go ahead and implement the program and you're not recovering your cost, then in effect you're subsidizing the program. If you are subsidizing the program, then that doesn't seem fair to the business community who has to pay their full share without any subsidies for their right to park in downtown. So there seems to be an inequity that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately going to be, policy call for the commission as well as the council. What were our basic guidelines that we were following, not guidelines, but we were taking a look at the 2000 program. There was extensive outreach to the business community as well as the residents at that time, and I read through the minutes and hearing some people talk tonight who also spoke, during those meetings, and we used that as a guide, and speaking to the city manager as well. I think that's our initial proposal in terms of cost structure, but things will work itself out through the program. But cost recovery is a goal, but it's not going to be a make or break deal in the end.
Aaron, is on, I guess.
Yeah, hey Ken.
Just to respond to Russ's comment, he must not be aware that the downtown development and property owners are so heavily subsidized with major grants, multi-million-dollar grants as a part of their projects because they don't provide the parking. I'm sure he just isn't aware of that.
Well, we could have that debate later. We'll also televise that one.
Is there anybody else that had a question that hadn't spoken yet?
I'm Jeff Sulzer, and I'm one of the businesses represented downtown. I run Palo Alto Bicycles. So as I view it, there's three problems that have created this. One is business. We're bringing a lot of people into downtown that work here. We really attempt to give incentives to my staff to not drive a car. I pay for Caltrain tickets for my staff. We give money back each month if they ride their bike. I've got a couple of staff members that don't even have a driver's license. So we really make an effort to do that. That said, I still have employees that periodically need to drive. I mean, it's a reality. If any of you guys work someplace outside of downtown, my assumption is you drive to that town and need some place to park your car. Take that away from you. How would you be feeling? We're not, part of it is our fault. Part of it is the city's fault. They've allowed things to happen that don't have parking buildings that come up that don't have parking associated with it. We've got, and the third prong of this is the residents themselves. We've got a resident here that said, I've got off-street parking, I can use it, I choose not to, I take up a street spot and I leave my off-street parking empty. I would kill to have off-street parking. I would kill to have it. So there's not one vilified group here. I think collectively we've all got to figure out how to get this solved. I'm up for this, and I recognize this is a reality and we're probably going to have to deal with it, but please don't make it to where there is one group that is the evil group here. Retailers, downtown businesses are not trying to take your spots. We're trying to be here to serve your community. Part of the reason you want to live here is this is such a great place to live because we've got such diverse businesses downtown. So I don't know what my point was.
No, I mean, I think overall, I mean, that's well said. I mean, we tried, this is our first attempt to where we have something that protects some of the quality of life for residential areas, that still allows some commuter parking within there, and still allows a base of customer parking, trying to get all those three groups. But, like any policy you put forward, it could be refined around the way and perfected.
Aaron, I got two questions, one very basic and one very global. I missed some of the detail here. Will there be 2- and 3-hour parking places at free-for-alls that customers, hello? Will there be 2- and 3-hour parking places that customers, restaurant people, restaurant workers, all will be vying for those places, and we'll get a lot of orbiting around searching for that, or is everything permitted?
No, there's 2- and 3-hour parking allowed within these zones. Correct.
So we're going to have even more turnover as people rush away from one 2-hour place to get to the next 2-hour place, because that goes on now.
Correct. So we would have to find some enforcement mechanism that tracks that and doesn't allow people to go from one place to the other place.
So you could go from 2-hour to 3-hour, though?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay. That's something certainly needs to be managed. A more global thing, every day between 6 o'clock and midday, 800 people park in downtown North. And it's going up every little bit, every so often. When this would be put in, either one of those plans, what's the intention for how many of those 800 people will or will not be encouraged to park there? Or is this truly a redistribution system? And just for the people in the audience, we're 83% parked now. And we have one little green zone in the far 40. I've got maps I'd like to hand people on the way out. If you want to see the distribution down to color coding, there's only, if we go even to 100% parking, we got blocks that are well over 100% parked. So the question is, what's your intention? It's sort of like for a guy coming to date your daughter the first time, what's your intentions for my neighborhood?
I think the first is reduction, as Michael pointed out, to improve the quality of life, to have so that you could find a spark. No, I'm not going to put it in terms right now, but our overall goal is reduction. And then also there is going to be some redistribution, and the point to redistribution is that, I mean, as your model even shows, that it's going to be there eventually. So I mean, I think it's an overall reduction in terms of current reduction and a redistribution now, but also a reduction in projection of parking impacts. Let Nielsen finish real quick. There you go.
I want to be very specific. I happen to know downtown North better than I know the back of my hand. So you're going to reach out to the people that are really going to get hit on this. 100 blocks of Webster, Cowper, Byron. I mean, they're in fool's paradise.
I think part of it is going to be, outreach on the neighborhood's part to let everyone understand. I mean, I think your model, and then the other part is outreach on our staff's part. And I think, things are going to, I mean, we're putting together, our initial proposal right now, but everything works out you know, through the process, and you know, hopefully is perfected in the end. But I promise that we won't, you know, get it 100% right tonight on our first proposal, but we're working towards that.
My name is Simon Sense. I'm a commercial property owner in the SOFA area, so I don't really belong in this evening's meeting, but a couple people from outside the North Downtown have spoken, so I'll limit my question to one question. And this is Jaime, this is a question that I asked you in June when we had the first meeting about this. And I'd hope that it would be answered tonight. So it's not a rhetorical question, it's a real question. These programs will eliminate parking, all-day parking for many business people. That's the whole point, is all these business people are parking, employees, whatever, are parking in front of people's homes. So to get rid of that, we're putting in these RPP zones. Where will these people park once these zones are put in? They're not going to disappear. Where will they park?
If I can just try to answer that question, that's why we're introducing the concept of allowing commuters to be able to purchase portions of the permits that can be available within each district. So we would not want to take all the parking away. There will be a certain allotment of permits made available to the districts adjacent to the commercial zone. So for the SOFA area, for example, you know, you could just look in the light blue area, you know, non-residents or commuters, employees of SOFA 1 would be allowed to purchase certain number of tickets or permits in that district, and we would only sell permits, you know, again, to downtown or SOFA employees.
Your response was it says a maximum 40% start down lower, so I got to believe that there's going to be people that can't find parking, they can't buy a parking.
So, and I'll follow up on that with 3 overall answers. First, what Jaime touched on, you know, allowing some intrusion, but yes, it's going to be less than there is now, and there's going to be some redistribution. Number 2, I think it's going to force some employees to use some parking they're not utilizing now on the top floors of some of the garages that are completely empty during the day. And number 3, I think it's going to force us as a city to better use our parking assets more efficiently through the use of parking attendant program and things. So it's not going to reach 100%, but it is going to force us to make some, you know, some choices as both the city and some of the commercial property owners.
And I would hope that you would consider what I'll call off-site parking. In other words, parking that's in the satellite areas that with shuttles.
I think that would be, you know, a great idea. And I think one thing I didn't touch on, number 4, is, you know, the city setting up in the colleagues memo saying we have to look at transportation demand management programs on a district-wide level to allow employees to enter the area and provide incentives to get people not to drive their cars on a solo basis.
I have a suggestion. I'm Ken Allen, one of the leaders from South Palo Alto, and I have a suggestion for downtown North and in the business district. If we're trying to increase the size of the pie rather than just cutting it up in smaller pieces, one thing that can be done, I believe, in areas where you can stripe it is to mark certain areas which are now no parking zones as parking zones for microcars and more motorcycles. That makes a lot of sense as we have more and more microcars used in the community. And second, and this is a suggestion, somewhat of a rhetorical question, is there anything that prevents residents from selling parking permits in their front yards?
So in designated parking areas, I mean, you could rent a parking space if you want to rent a parking space. I mean, you can't rent your front lawn, but you know, you could rent your driveway or rent. And I'm sure there are. I mean, if you look on Craigslist right now, I bet you could find a parking space for sale somewhere in the downtown area. So yeah, that's allowed.
So I live in. My name is Brad Hickin. I live actually in Menlo Park, in an area that does have an RPP program in place. That part of that program takes into account off-street parking. Part of that program takes into account off-street parking. So I have a garage that is a 2-car garage, and I get credit for those 2-car garages. Will any thought go into, you know, how much spaces, how much off-street parking residents have when issuing these permits, or is there no consideration to off-street parking?
Probably have to give that more thought. I mean, our initial take, and like once again, we were following the 2000 model, but our initial take is that 2 permits would be made available to each household if they have the 2 licensed drivers and registered cars there. I think beyond that, there would have to be some type of proof that they don't have on-site parking supplied to meet their needs.
So just a quick clarification: the on-street parking, if I get a commuter permit for one of my employees or for my business, we can transfer that between employees.
Correct.
Can we do that as this moves ahead with the top floors of the parking garages?
Yeah, unfortunately, no, and that's just the way that it's basically the way that the parking garages were financed only allow it to be issued to a person and not a business. So if it's ever refinanced, that could be the situation.
Aaron, hypothetical question. No. The residents get up in the morning, they go to run errands, and a 2-hour parker moves into the neighborhood. Theoretically, they could completely park up a block, and the resident comes back with their permit, and they can't find a parking space. Is that correct?
Yeah, in theory, but I think whatever we do, we have to take into consideration the likelihood of the percentage of 2-hour parkers, within a block. I don't think we're not doing away with the 2 and 3 hour, color zones downtown. And talking to people, I mean, it's primarily people who park and sit their cars there all day that are intruding on the neighborhood, not necessarily the customers. So I think we're going to have to pay attention to what's the likelihood of and what percentage of 2-hour parkers in each block when we decide on the allocation of commuter parking permits.
So why not, to ensure that kind of thing doesn't happen, designate a specific number of spots for the 2-hour parking on each block and let the remainder be for resident permit parking?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we can consider.
Or permit parking in general.
I mean, that's something we can consider. We've heard the opposite from some people in the neighborhood who want ample parking there for, people who come over quickly to visit or have some of their household, or household service. So, I mean, that was what we've heard as well. But yeah, that's a thought.
Hi, I brought this up before.
You have to put it real close.
Whether everyone in an apartment building would be allowed to vote on this, or whether it was just some committee or the building owner, shall we call it that?
If you're a resident, you would be able to vote on it. We have to.
Okay. So every resident.
Yeah. Let me think about how we'd ultimately distribute that, but.
Every unit gets it.
Yeah, every unit.
So every unit of an apartment complex would get 1 survey.
Oh, okay.
Actually, a suggestion. I now use my driveway as a parking space. There are a lot of driveways in downtown North. And so far, the parking people have never ticketed me for parking in my driveway. But I'm thinking, A, I don't want that to happen under a new system. But a second thing is people can park across their driveway. No, I park in the street across my driveway. Block my own driveway. I don't mind blocking my own driveway. My wife and I have a deal.
That would actually be a violation. You would like to get a ticket.
It's ultimately an enforcement issue, but I mean, it's a violation of the law right now. So I mean, it would depend how we ultimately decide to enforce the existing. It may be, I don't know if it's in the vehicle code or if it's in the local code, so we need to take a look at that. Absolutely.
Could you please explain the rationale between the 2 or 3 hour limits in the different zones? I'm just thinking as a resident in what looks like it'll be a 2-hour zone. Often maybe I'd have a cleaner come to my house who might take 2.5 hours. I'm just wondering what your thinking was there.
So in general, we have more 2-hour zones than 3-hour zones. What we didn't want is a situation where, someone takes as a part-time shift or something, is in parks in faraway neighborhood and, rolls the dice that they're not going to, they have a 4-hour shift. So it was basically what we've heard from the neighborhood, that we didn't want to hear, that we didn't want a massive area with more than 2-hour parking.
Just another partial response to that too is that, I don't mean to sound contradictive, but one of the reasons why we're looking at providing a permit that's on a hang tag is that, in a way, that is a resident and a guest permit. So, I mean, we wouldn't want you to sell it, and there'll be mechanisms with police enforcement and video surveillance of license plates to see make sure that's not happening. But there would be nothing to prevent you from using the permit that you have for your car, if you can park it in your own space, to then give that to a guest, or in this case, a service vehicle.
And then another point onto that, Vice Chair Keller just pointed out, there's also scratcher day permits that you could buy. So if you had something, that you want to go at a nominal cost, you could give it to them to park more than that.
Does the city have an interest in getting my car off the street during the day? And if so, what's the motivation for me to tuck it back in the corner where I live?
I mean, sure, we have a motivation, but I mean, you only could, induce certain behaviors, usually through pricing.
You've given me a free parking permit.
We didn't say it was free.
Okay, you've given me fair enough.
Yeah, we didn't say it was free.
Yeah. So there will be a cost to it, but I mean, it'll be a cost that's fair. So. But we hope you all do the right thing.
If there's no other questions, Aaron, I think we've answered all the questions in the audience tonight.
So I'm sure. Closing remarks, Nielsen.
A couple of things. I've been very involved, and so have a handful of people around here tonight. If you would really like to get your name and email, you may have turned it in out front, but we'd like to be able to talk to people quickly by email and on our Nextdoor website. So if you'd stop by and sign up, I would greatly appreciate it. I also have a whole bunch of interesting data that you may want to take home that I haven't bothered you with, but I think it's a basis of being able to make good personal decisions. One question on the gray zone that's called commercial. You're taking, what is that?
So there's primarily commercial establishments there. So if there is a residential unit within there, they will get a permit. But for the most part, it would be timed 4-hour parking for those commercial businesses down there.
Because that's a substantial increase in there. And along Alma, on the railroad track side, there's a great deal of parking. Yeah. What's going to happen to that?
Someone brought that up. We honestly hadn't thought about that yet, but let us think about that some and then come back to you.
You're not going to take it away, are you?
No.
I'm hearing a couple of things that sound a bit contradictory regarding the fact that it's a hangar permit and presumably that you could transfer it if someone came over to do some work on your house or someone came to visit for a substantial period of time. But I'm also hearing that permits need to be tied to specific license plates and the like. So I guess I'm hearing two different things about the philosophy of whether a permit is tied to a specific car or not.
So let me try to answer that, Aaron. I think what we're saying is that once the photo enforcement unit is established, through that enforcement unit, we'll be able to identify trends of if there's a regular license plate that we see is not tied to a permit, then that could be something that it would need to be targeted. But we're basically just trying to make sure that the community has flexibility with the permit. That was one of the things that we did with Crescent Park. In the Crescent Park, it isn't a permit that's tied to the vehicle. It was just one type of a permit that was a permit for the household. And that was flexibility that people wanted people to use it for their car, or if they had kids visiting, for the summer or for college or on a weekend, they would have to go buy separate individual permits. They would have that flexibility. So I think a lot of those details we still need to work out. That, at least for now, was just the general concept. Ma'am.
One thing I'll add, though, I mean, the general spirit of it is that it's tied to the household and not sold on the black market. So we'll work out the legal details in the future.
I just want to ask who devised this color grid and what makes it a 2-hour or 3-hour? Is it closer to the town? Is it 2 hours and further away it's 3 hours?
Did you want to answer? So in general, we used most of the grids we used that were based off the process that went on in 2000. So we replicated those, and then we created the alternative that showed, bigger bands of areas if that's what the residents, ultimately wanted to go for. So, I mean, every zone would be somewhat arbitrary, but that was our best estimate of taking up zones. Then you want to answer the second part?
No, it's pretty much what Aaron just said. The what we called the option A, that was actually something that we had built upon based off the discussions we had in 2012. So in 2012, when we were looking at RPP concepts in the Professorville area, working with the businesses and the residences, that kind of begins to match that process or mind thought at that time. And you are right, like we mentioned before, the first couple blocks immediately north of the downtown core, those are 3-hour zones, without a permit. And then as you got outside of that, then you entered the 2 hours. But at the same time, part of the input since 2012 was that in the downtown north commercial area, or that gray area, those businesses were telling us they wanted a 4-hour parking because that's what they needed for their types of businesses. And the SOFA 1 area was kind of making it kind of clear to us, well, they like the 2-hour concept. So we just matched the input, to what you're seeing here. The option B, that was something that was done back in 2000. We just basically matched the concepts, but expanded them a little bit more to match the grid of option A. Then let us know. That's why we're here tonight.
So kind of forgive my cynicism here on this perspective, but on this entire proposal, depending on where your stance is, whether you're for or you're against it, what exactly is the plan or the schedule? Is this in inevitability? Is some portion or some variant of this plan going to be happening regardless of whether you're for or against it? And what exactly is the vote that you're proposing to the City Council?
So at this point, it's a staff recommendation. I mean, I can say that there is significant momentum, both from residents in the downtown area as well as people on the commission and the council, to come to some type of solution related to a residential permit program for the overall area. But we are going to send out the surveys to everyone within the neighborhoods to get a true vote of what people feel. But I would say more time than ever, there is significant momentum to get some type of policy adopted.
Are you, as a planner, planning on building more garages, perhaps?
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Aaron, will the businesses be included in that survey, or is this strictly for residents?
There will be a survey for residents, but we're also going to outreach specifically to the businesses to gain input as well.
If I can jump in, so like for the businesses that are within that, what I keep calling the downtown north commercial zone, or the property holders in the SOFA 1, those would get surveys because they would be able to buy permits. We wouldn't survey, for do you want the RPP in your district, likely the downtown core. I think we would need to have some sort of a different survey to solicit input from the downtown core, and we are going to be holding a meeting with the downtown business, or just offer to meet with them sometime in the next few weeks, and that'll be organized through the Palo Alto Downtown Business Association.
Anyone else? No? Well, thank you all for coming out tonight and being good spirit and providing feedback. We really do want your feedback, so give it to us. I'd also encourage you to work with Nielsen and everyone else. He's done a great job outreaching to people, and we appreciate his input. Thank you all. Oh, and we're good. I didn't mean it that way. And we're also putting up our email addresses on the screen right now if you want to jot them down. You could find us online as well.